Picture this. Rome is burning. The year is 64, and the great city is engulfed in flames. Panic spreads like wildfire, literally, as chaos consumes the streets. But amidst the smoke and screams, one man stands unmoved. Emperor Nero. No, that's a myth. The truth is far more fascinating. It's Marcus Aurelius, decades later, facing his own inferno, not of fire, but of war, plague, and betrayal. And yet, he doesn't crumble, he doesn't rage, he writes. In the quiet of his tent, he pens words that would echo for millennia. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That's the power of emotional endurance. It's not about suppressing feelings. It's about mastering them so thoroughly that even in the darkest moments, you can think, act, and lead with clarity. And history, it's littered with these turning points, moments where a single person's ability to withstand emotional storms didn't just change their fate, but the fate of nations. This is the essence of Stoicism, a philosophy forged not in comfort, but in crisis. It's why figures like Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus didn't just endure, they thrived. They understood what modern science now confirms. Resilience isn't innate, it's built, and when cultivated, it becomes the invisible force that bends history. Think of the explorer Ernest Shackleton, stranded on Antarctic ice for 2 years, keeping his crew alive not with supplies, but with unshakable resolve. Or Harriet Tubman, leading hundreds to freedom despite unimaginable fear, her courage a testament to the Stoic ideal. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. These aren't just stories, they're blueprints, because emotional endurance isn't about weathering storms, it's about steering through them. So what if I told you that 30 times in history, this very skill altered the course of events? Not through brute strength or luck, but through the quiet, relentless power of emotional control. From battlefields to boardrooms, from revolutions to personal redemption, the thread is the same. Those who harnessed their emotions didn't just survive, they shaped the world. And here's the most thrilling part. This isn't reserved for emperors or heroes. It's available to you because the same principles that guided Marcus Aurelius can guide anyone willing to learn. Over the next 30 examples, we'll uncover how emotional endurance didn't just change lives, it changed history. And by the end, you'll see your own challenges through a new lens, not as obstacles, but as opportunities to forge your own legacy. Ready? Let's begin. The American Revolution was hanging by a thread. It was December 25th, 1776, and George Washington's army was freezing, starving, and outnumbered. The Delaware River was choked with ice, and morale had hit rock bottom. Most commanders would have crumbled under the weight of despair, but not Washington. Instead of showing panic, he projected calm. He rallied his troops, crossed the treacherous river under cover of night, and launched a surprise attack that turned the tide of the war. What was his secret? It wasn't superior strategy or brute force. It was emotional endurance, the Stoic art of mastering inner turmoil to act with clarity in chaos. This is the heart of Stoic philosophy, the realization that while we can't control external events, we can always control our response. Seneca, the great Stoic thinker, put it bluntly, difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Washington embodied this. He didn't ignore fear. He acknowledged it, then set it aside to do what needed to be done. His ability to stay composed under extreme pressure didn't just save his army, it birthed a nation. Think about your own life for a moment. There's no revolution or frozen river, but there are moments when everything feels like it's falling apart. A job loss, a health scare, a personal betrayal. The Stoic approach isn't about pretending hardship doesn't exist. It's about facing it with a mind trained to stay steady. Because history shows us again and again, the people who change the course of events aren't those with the fewest problems, but those who refuse to let problems dictate their actions. Washington's story isn't just a lesson in leadership. It's proof that emotional endurance isn't passive, it's a weapon. One that can turn desperation into victory and crisis into legacy. And the most empowering part, this skill isn't reserved for generals or emperors. It's built through daily practice, through choosing reason over reaction, purpose over panic. That's how ordinary people like you become the calm in the storm, the ones who don't just survive history but shape it. Napoleon Bonaparte stood on the deck of a British ship, watching the coastline of France disappear into the horizon. It was 1815, and the man who once ruled Europe was now a prisoner, exiled to the remote island of St. Helena. Most would see this as the end: humiliation, powerlessness, the crushing weight of failure. But Napoleon did something extraordinary. Instead of drowning in bitterness, he turned exile into a laboratory of the mind. He studied, he wrote, he reflected on his mistakes with the clarity of a Stoic philosopher. Centuries earlier, Epictetus had laid down the principle that would define Napoleon's exile. Some things are within our control and some are not. The weather, the island's isolation, even the British Guards, these were beyond his reach. But his thoughts, his attitude, his ability to learn from defeat, those were his alone to command. This is where resilience separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. Napoleon could have spent his days raging against fate, plotting impossible escapes, or sinking into despair. Instead, he channeled his energy into what he could control. He dictated memoirs, analyzed military campaigns, and even studied English not as a prisoner, but as a student of his own life. His circumstances were harsh, but his mind remained free. That's the Stoic secret. Defeat isn't defined by what happens to you, but by how you let it shape you. History loves winners, but the truth is, every great leader has faced crushing setbacks. What made Napoleon different was his refusal to let exile break him. He embraced the Stoic practice of amor fati, loving one's fate, even when it's bitter. Imagine applying that to your own life. The job you didn't get, the relationship that fell apart, the plan that collapsed. These aren't just disappointments, they're invitations to ask, what can I control here? Napoleon's story isn't about glorifying failure. It's about revealing the hidden power in surrender, not to circumstance but to growth. When the world shrinks around you, that's when your mind can expand. Think of Epictetus, born a slave, yet forging a philosophy that would outlive empires, or Nelson Mandela, turning 27 years in prison into a masterclass in patience and perspective. The pattern is clear. The people who reshape history aren't those who avoid falls, but those who rise wiser every time they hit the ground. So here's a question to carry with you. When life forces you into your own St. Helena, when you're stuck, sidelined, or starting over, what will you do with the things you still control? Will you fixate on the chains, or will you, like Napoleon, find freedom in the space between them? Because resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about bending without breaking and returning not just stronger but wiser. That's how exile becomes enlightenment. That's how defeat becomes destiny. London was in flames. The year was 1940, and the skies above Britain roared with the engines of German bombers. Night after night, buildings collapsed, lives were lost, and fear gripped the nation. In the heart of the storm stood Winston Churchill, 65 years old, cigar in hand, voice unshaken. While advisors whispered of surrender, he delivered speeches that would become lifelines for a terrified people. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall never surrender. But here's what most history books miss. Churchill's strength wasn't just in his words. It was in the daily discipline of a man who, like Marcus Aurelius, understood that leadership begins with self-mastery. You could leave life right now, Aurelius wrote. Let that determine what you do and say and think. For Churchill, every speech, every decision, every sleepless night was an answer to that same call, not just to lead, but to endure. Behind the scenes, Churchill battled his own storms. He called it the black dog, the crushing weight of depression that followed him for decades. Yet when the world needed him most, he didn't hide from it, he harnessed it. The Stoics would have recognized his strategy instantly: transform pain into fuel. Late at night, while London burned, he'd pace his war rooms, dictating memos, reviewing maps, refusing to let exhaustion or despair cloud his judgment. This wasn't natural brilliance, it was practiced resilience. He'd spent years studying history, preparing his mind for the moment when everything would depend on his ability to stay steady. And when that moment came, he didn't rise to the occasion, he fell back on his training. That's the heart of Stoic leadership, doing the work long before the crisis hits. Marcus Aurelius didn't wait for war to practice courage. He wrote reminders to himself in the quiet hours. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Churchill lived that same principle. His famous Defiance wasn't spontaneity. It was the culmination of a lifetime spent wrestling with doubt, refining his voice, and choosing discipline over distraction. Now consider your own life. You may not be facing the blitz, but you have your own battles, moments when fear whispers that retreat is easier than standing firm. Maybe it's a career setback, a family struggle, or a personal goal that feels impossible. Here's the question Churchill's example forces us to ask. What's your version of those midnight war room sessions? How are you preparing now for the storms you'll face later? Because history's most decisive moments aren't shaped by sudden heroism, but by the quiet, daily choice to show up, even when no one's watching. Churchill's legacy isn't just about winning a war. It's about proving that resilience is a craft, honed in the shadows before it's tested in the spotlight. The bombs stopped, the speeches faded, but the lesson remains. When the world feels like it's ending, the difference between those who break and those who lead comes down to one thing: the courage to treat every challenge, big or small, as preparation for the next. So tonight, as you turn off the lights, ask yourself, what's my war room, and what will I build there that might one day change everything? Salt stained his sandals as Mahatma Gandhi walked 240 miles to the sea. It was 1930, and British law banned Indians from collecting salt, a basic necessity of life. With every blistering step, Gandhi embodied what Seneca called the greatest power of the mind, not brute force, but the courage to endure. His march wasn't just protest, it was philosophy in motion. While empires rose and fell on violence, Gandhi proved something radical: that patience could be sharper than any sword. The Stoics would have recognized his strategy instantly. No tree becomes rooted and sturdy unless many a wind assails it, Seneca wrote. By fighting it, the tree toughens. Gandhi's resistance worked the same way. When British officers beat unarmed protesters, the world watched in horror, not at the cruelty of the oppressed, but at the unshakable calm of those who refused to strike back. This wasn't passivity, it was patience weaponized. Like a Stoic sage, Gandhi understood that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering your own reactions. Every clenched fist that swung at his followers only tightened his movement's grip on global sympathy. Imagine applying this to your daily life, the co-worker who undermines you, the traffic jam that steals an hour, the endless wait for a promotion. These aren't just annoyances, they're your salt march. The Stoic practice of premeditatio malorum, imagining worst-case scenarios, wasn't about pessimism. It was training. Gandhi spent years preparing his mind for imprisonment, hunger strikes, and humiliation, so when they came, he could say, as Epictetus taught, "This is what I've practiced for." Here's the twist most miss: patience isn't waiting, it's working while you wait. Gandhi didn't just sit quietly for independence. He spun cotton, wrote letters, and built schools during his decades of struggle. Marcus Aurelius called this the art of acquiescence, not surrendering to fate, but bending it to your will through relentless, quiet action. So try this today. When frustration flares, ask, what can I build in this delay? Every stalled moment is a chance to practice what Seneca called the virtue of those who seem to be doing nothing. Because history doesn't remember who yelled loudest, it remembers who lasted longest. And whether you're facing an empire or an everyday irritation, the principle remains: endurance isn't just survival. It's strategy in slow motion. The knife pierced Julius Caesar's flesh not once but 23 times. The year was 44 BC, and the most powerful man in Rome collapsed at the feet of senators he'd pardoned, men he'd called friends. Yet what stunned historians wasn't the violence, it was Caesar's reaction. According to legend, his last act wasn't to curse his killers or beg for mercy. He pulled his robe over his face, preserving his dignity even in betrayal. That detail, more than the assassination itself, reveals a mind trained in Stoic detachment. Centuries before, Epictetus had laid down the principle Caesar unknowingly followed. If someone betrays you, betray your anger, not your peace. Here's what most miss about betrayal: the deepest wound isn't the act itself, but the story we tell about it. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. When Brutus raised his dagger, Caesar could have seen it as proof that trust is foolish, that power always corrupts. Instead, his final gesture suggested something radical: that betrayal, however painful, doesn't have to dictate your final chapter. Marcus Aurelius would later write, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In other words, don't let someone else's actions degrade your character. Now hold that thought and fast forward 1900 years. Nelson Mandela walks out of prison after 27 years, looks his jailers in the eye, and invites them to help build a new South Africa. Like Caesar, Mandela had every reason to rage. Unlike Caesar, he had decades to stew in bitterness. Yet he chose the Stoic path: recognize the injustice, then rise above it. Epictetus, born a slave himself, put it bluntly: lambs don't get angry at wolves, they just run faster. The message: betrayal isn't personal, it's part of the human condition. The question isn't whether it will happen, but what you'll do when it does. So here's a challenge for you. Think of a betrayal you've experienced, big or small. A friend who gossiped, a partner who lied, a colleague who stole credit. Now ask yourself, did your reaction strengthen you or shrink you? The Stoic approach isn't about pretending it doesn't hurt. It's about refusing to let that pain define you. Imagine if Caesar had spent his final moments listing grievances. Would we remember him differently? Absolutely, because history doesn't honor victims, it honors those who meet cruelty with unbroken spirit. This is the hidden gift of betrayal. It strips away illusions, revealing who you really are. Seneca, who himself was betrayed and exiled, wrote, "Fire tests gold, adversity tests strong men." So the next time someone stabs you in the back, literally or figuratively, remember, you get to choose whether to bleed or to heal wiser. That's the Stoic secret, not avoiding the knife, but mastering the art of standing tall even as it falls. The bus was crowded that December evening in 1955, the air thick with tension and the weight of unjust laws. When the driver demanded her seat, Rosa Parks didn't shout, she didn't plead, she simply said, "No." That single word, spoken with quiet conviction, echoed louder than any scream. In that moment, Parks embodied what Marcus Aurelius called the strength of restraint, the power to let actions, not outbursts, carry your truth. "Silence is a lesson learned from the many sufferings of life," he wrote. And in her silence, Parks taught the world a masterclass in dignity. The Stoics understood something radical about strength. Sometimes the most powerful statement is the one you don't make. Epictetus, born into slavery, knew this firsthand. If you wish to improve, he taught, be content to appear clueless or stupid, not because ignorance is virtue, but because refusing to engage in petty battles frees you to win the war. Parks' refusal to argue, to dignify oppression with debate, was Stoicism in action. Her calm wasn't passivity, it was a calculated strike at the heart of injustice. While others might have met anger with anger, she met it with unshakable poise, revealing the ugliness of segregation without uttering a word. Think of the last time someone tried to provoke you. A rude comment, a condescending remark, a deliberate slight. The heat rises in your chest, words gathering like storm clouds. But what if, like Parks, you let silence do the talking? Not as surrender, but as strategy, Seneca put it bluntly. To be silent is not to lack words, it is to ration them. Every unspoken retort is energy saved for battles that truly matter. Here's the twist most miss. Silence isn't empty, it's a canvas. In those quiet seconds between insult and reaction, you have the chance to paint your character. Marcus Aurelius filled his silence with journaling, refining his thoughts before they became actions. Parks filled hers with resolve, letting her stillness amplify the injustice around her. Your silence, too, can hold power, whether it's choosing not to engage in office gossip or walking away from a toxic argument. So tonight, as you replay the day's frustrations, ask yourself, where could silence have been my ally? Not the silence of fear, but the silence of strength, the kind that speaks volumes without raising a voice, because history doesn't remember the loudest in the room. It remembers those who, like Parks, knew exactly when to let quiet do the talking. Abraham Lincoln's private writings reveal a man haunted by what he called the fatal darkness. Long before he became the president who saved a nation, he battled crushing depression, waking nightmares so severe his friends feared he might take his own life. Yet this same man would later guide America through its bloodiest war with a steadiness that stunned his allies and enemies alike. How? Lincoln didn't suppress his pain, he transformed it. Like a Stoic alchemist, he turned suffering into fuel, using the very weight that might have broken him to anchor a fractured country. Seneca's words might as well have been written for him. Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Here's what most biographers overlook. Lincoln's greatest leadership tool wasn't his wit or his words, it was his practiced familiarity with despair. He'd spent years staring into the abyss, so when the nation teetered on the edge, he didn't flinch. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the deliberate contemplation of worst-case scenarios. While others panicked over battlefield losses, Lincoln remained eerily calm. Why? Because he'd already endured his own inner civil wars. His depressive episodes became a grueling training ground for resilience, proving Seneca's radical claim, the obstacle becomes the way. Imagine applying this to your own struggles. That job rejection, that health scare, that relationship fallout. What if they're not setbacks but drills? Lincoln's secret was treating every personal crisis as preparation for greater trials ahead. When the weight of wartime decisions pressed down, he didn't buckle under the new burden. He recognized it as familiar terrain. Marcus Aurelius described this mindset perfectly. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. But here's the crucial nuance. Lincoln didn't just endure depression, he weaponized its lessons. His famous empathy for wounded soldiers, born from nights spent wrestling his own invisible wounds, his refusal to demonize the South, forged in the knowledge that hatred corrodes the hater most. This is Stoicism at its most profound, not denying pain, but distilling wisdom from it. Like a blacksmith tempering steel, Lincoln used life's hardest blows to shape something unbreakable. So tonight, as you lie awake with your own fatal darkness, consider Lincoln's example. That anxiety you're battling, it's sharpening your senses for future challenges. That failure you're replaying, it's building calluses where you'll need them most. The Stoics weren't wrong when they said fortune favors the prepared mind. They just never told us preparation would hurt. But as Lincoln proved, the pain isn't the end of the story. It's the raw material of greatness. The royal court buzzed with whispers of marriage proposals, of war threats, of endless demands on England's virgin queen. Yet Elizabeth I sat motionless, her face a mask of calm. It was 1588, and the Spanish Armada, the most fearsome naval force in Europe, was sailing toward her shores. Advisors urged panic, allies begged for reassurance, but Elizabeth did something extraordinary. She waited, not out of indecision, but with the precision of a Stoic master. If you want to improve, Epictetus had written centuries earlier, be content to seem clueless or stupid in external matters. Elizabeth took this further. She weaponized detachment. While others scrambled, she projected serenity, knowing that in politics, as in philosophy, the appearance of control often becomes control itself. Detachment wasn't indifference for Elizabeth, it was strategy. When her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, plotted against her, Elizabeth delayed execution for 19 years, refusing to let emotion override cold calculation. She understood what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind." By detaching from personal vendettas, she outmaneuvered rivals who were too busy reacting to act wisely. Even her famed refusal to marry wasn't just about power, it was about avoiding the chaos of attachment. Every suitor represented an alliance that could drag England into war, a risk she neutralized by keeping all of Europe guessing. Now contrast this with modern leadership. How often do we see politicians, or even ourselves, make decisions based on fleeting outrage or the need for immediate validation? The Stoic ideal Elizabeth embodied flips this script. Detachment isn't about not caring. It's about caring so deeply for the long game that you refuse to be distracted by short-term noise. Epictetus put it bluntly, it's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters. When the Armada finally attacked, Elizabeth didn't hide in fear. She donned armor and rallied her troops with a speech that echoed through history, not because she lacked emotion, but because she'd mastered its timing. So here's a challenge for you. Look at your own life. What's your version of the Spanish Armada? The co-worker who tries to provoke you, the social media outrage cycle, the pressure to conform to others' expectations. These are all battles where detachment is your armor. Try this. Next time you feel pulled to react, pause and ask, what would Elizabeth do? Not because you should be cold or unfeeling, but because some storms pass easier when you refuse to sail into them. The Queen's greatest legacy wasn't her victories, it was her ability to stand still while the world rushed around her, proving that sometimes the most powerful move is the one you don't make. Robben Island's limestone quarry blinded prisoners with its glare, the sun reflecting off white rock like a cruel joke. Nelson Mandela spent 6 years there breaking stones alongside comrades, his body bent but his mind unbowed. In that brutal isolation, he lived out Marcus Aurelius' meditation on solitude. Nowhere can a man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. But here's what history often misses: Mandela didn't just endure those 27 years. He transformed prison into a crucible, using enforced solitude to forge something extraordinary. Not bitterness, but a vision broad enough to reconcile a fractured nation. The Stoics understood what Mandela proved, that isolation isn't emptiness waiting to be filled, but space waiting to be used. While guards measured his days in labor and lockdowns, Mandela measured his in books studied, debates held with fellow prisoners, and letters written in secret. Like Epictetus, who turned his enslavement into a school for philosophy, Mandela treated his cell as a classroom. Where others saw confinement, he saw curriculum. The same man who could recite Shakespeare from memory also studied Afrikaans, the language of his oppressors, because he knew liberation would require understanding, not just force. Now consider your own life. Those moments when you feel cut off, the commute alone in traffic, the quiet apartment after a breakup, the hospital waiting room before bad news. These aren't just gaps between events, they're opportunities to practice what Seneca called conversations with the great minds. Mandela read Tolstoy in prison not to escape reality, but to reshape it. What could you read or write in your waiting periods that might change everything? Here's the radical truth Mandela revealed: solitude sharpens either resentment or resilience, depending on what you feed it. Marcus Aurelius warned, "You become what you give your attention to." While his jailers hoped isolation would break Mandela's spirit, they accidentally gave him the one thing revolutionaries rarely get: time to think deeply without distraction or hurry. The man who walked out of prison in 1990 wasn't just older, he was wiser, tempered by stillness in ways no battlefield could match. So tonight, when you find yourself alone with your thoughts, ask Mandela's question: is this emptiness or incubation? The Stoic secret isn't to fear solitude, but to wield it, to let quiet become the anvil where you hammer your character into something unbreakable. Because the world doesn't change in the noise of crowds, but in the silence of cells, where one man decides that 27 years won't define him, they'll refine him. Calcutta's streets swallowed sunlight, leaving only heat and hunger in their wake. Amid the human wreckage moved a small figure in a white sari, Mother Teresa, bending to lift a dying man abandoned on the sidewalk. Flies swarmed his wounds, but her hands didn't hesitate. This wasn't pity, it was philosophy in action. Centuries before, Seneca had written, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." Mother Teresa embodied the Stoic paradox. That true strength isn't hardness, but the courage to stay tender in a world that rewards indifference. What most miss about her story is the relentless emotional labor behind those acts. Stoicism never taught detachment from humanity, only from the destructive emotions that prevent us from serving it. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, reminded himself daily, men exist for one another. Mother Teresa took this further, living it in the filthiest gutters of Kolkata. When critics accused her of enabling suffering by offering comfort rather than systemic change, she responded with a Stoic's clarity: "We cannot all do great things, but we can do small things with great love." This wasn't resignation, it was radical focus, choosing to alleviate the pain within her reach rather than despairing over what she couldn't fix. Now consider your own life. That coworker who grates on your nerves, the neighbor whose dog won't stop barking, the stranger who cut you off in traffic, these aren't just annoyances. They're your Calcutta streets, your opportunities to practice what Epictetus called the discipline of ascent, the choice to respond with patience instead of irritation. Mother Teresa's endurance didn't come from superhuman willpower. It came from daily decisions to see dignity where others saw only dirt. Here's where Stoic compassion becomes revolutionary. It's not about feeling more, but about mastering your emotions so you can act effectively amid chaos. Seneca observed, "He who does good to another does good also to himself." Mother Teresa's clinics weren't just shelters for the poor, they were gymnasiums for her soul, where she strengthened her capacity for love through constant use. The tears she shed weren't signs of weakness, but proof she refused to grow numb. So here's a challenge. Next time stress tightens your chest, when deadlines loom or tempers flare, pause. Ask yourself, what would happen if I channeled this energy into one deliberate act of kindness? Not grand gestures, but the Stoics' bread and butter work, holding the door, listening without interrupting, buying coffee for the person behind you. Because history's quiet secret is that endurance isn't just about bearing pain, it's about transforming it into love, one small, stubborn act at a time. The saints and sages agree, the world changes not when we avoid suffering, but when we let it soften rather than harden us. Your greatest strength might just be your willingness to kneel in the gutter with someone who can't stand alone. The laboratory walls still smelled of smoke from the latest explosion. It was 1880, and newspapers mocked Thomas Edison as the Wizard of Menlo Park, not with admiration, but with sneering skepticism. After his 1000th failed attempt to invent the electric light bulb, even his own financiers whispered that he was chasing fairy tales. Yet when a reporter asked how it felt to fail so spectacularly, Edison didn't bristle or defend himself. He simply said, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." In that moment, he channeled Epictetus' most brutal truth. If someone tells you that so and so speaks ill of you, don't bother denying it. Just say yes, and he doesn't know the half of it. He'd say worse if he knew all my faults. What most biographers miss is that Edison's genius wasn't just technical, it was psychological. While rivals crumbled under criticism, he treated mockery like weather, inconvenient but never personal. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but the art of separating your self-worth from external judgments. Marcus Aurelius practiced it daily, writing, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own." Edison lived this contradiction. When bankers withdrew funding, he sold stock in his own company to keep experimenting. When peers called him a fraud, he hung their scathing reviews on his lab walls as motivation. The louder the world laughed, the quieter his mind became. Now imagine applying this to your life. That passive-aggressive comment from a colleague, the relative who scoffs at your ambitions, the internet troll who nitpicks your work, these aren't just annoyances. They're your version of Edison's newspaper clippings. The Stoic approach isn't to pretend criticism doesn't sting, it's to interrogate why it stings. Epictetus drills down, why are you upset because someone insulted you? That's their problem, not yours. Edison took this further. He mined ridicule for useful data. If critics said his ideas were impossible, he'd test their claims, not their motives. Here's the twist: resilience to criticism isn't about thick skin. It's about porous skin, letting what's useful seep in while the rest runs off. Seneca advised, listen to everyone, but talk only to yourself. Edison did exactly this, keeping diaries where he debated his own flaws rather than his detractors. When a fire destroyed years of research in 1914, he told his son, "Go get your mother, she'll never see a fire like this again." That's Stoic indifference in action, acknowledging disaster without letting it dictate your next move. So tonight, when you replay some cutting remark in your head, ask Edison's question, Is this feedback or noise? The difference determines whether criticism breaks you or builds you. History's trailblazers weren't those who avoided ridicule. They were the ones who let it roll off their backs like water off a duck, all while paddling furiously beneath the surface. Your critics get a sentence, you get to write the rest of the story. The ice groaned like a living thing beneath the Endurance, its wooden beams screaming under pressure as the Antarctic winter tightened its grip. 1915 had barely begun when Ernest Shackleton's ship was crushed like matchwood, stranding 28 men on a frozen wasteland with nothing but 3 lifeboats and dwindling hope. What happened next wasn't just survival, it was Stoicism in its purest form. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The obstacle is the way," and Shackleton embodied it. He didn't just endure, he turned desperation into a masterclass in leadership, proving that perseverance isn't about ignoring fear, it's about acting in spite of it. For 22 months, Shackleton faced decisions that would have broken lesser men. When their supplies ran low, he rationed his own meals to give his crew more. When morale plummeted, he organized soccer matches on the ice to keep spirits alive. Even the infamous 800-mile open boat journey to South Georgia Island, a voyage so treacherous it's still studied by naval experts, wasn't born of recklessness but of calculated courage. Shackleton understood what Epictetus meant when he said, "It's not what happens to you but how you react that matters." While his men saw only a frozen hell, he saw a test of character, whispering to his diary words that could have come straight from Seneca. Difficulties are just things to overcome, after all. Here's what history books glaze over. Shackleton's real triumph wasn't bringing his crew home alive. It was how he made endurance contagious. He didn't command obedience, he inspired it by example. When the ice floes shifted unpredictably, he remained predictably steady. When tempers flared, he diffused tension with humor. This wasn't natural charisma, it was practiced discipline. Like Marcus Aurelius journaling by candlelight, Shackleton kept a meticulous log, not just of their physical trials, but of his own emotional regulation. He knew that in extremis, leadership isn't about shouting orders, it's about embodying the calm you wish to see. Now zoom out to your life. That project that feels impossible, that goal that keeps slipping further away, that voice whispering, "Quit, these are your pack ice." The Stoic lesson Shackleton offers isn't about grand gestures, but daily micro-resilience. When he wrote, "Optimism is true moral courage," he might as well have been quoting Epictetus. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Every time you choose effort over escape, you're not just pushing your limits, you're rewriting them. So here's the challenge hidden in Shackleton's story. Endurance isn't a single heroic act. It's the sum of 1,000 small decisions. To get up when you're exhausted, to share when you're starving, to lead when you're terrified. The ice always melts eventually. The question is, who will you have become by the time it does? Flames licked the wooden stakes as the crowd roared for blood. 19-year-old Joan of Arc stood chained in the Rowan marketplace, heresy charges hanging over her like the smoke that would soon claim her. Yet when her accusers demanded she recant, the peasant girl who'd led armies did something extraordinary. She smiled, not in defiance but with eerie serenity, whispering, "I am not afraid, I was born to do this." Centuries earlier, Seneca had written, "A brave man is tested in adversity like gold in fire." And in that moment, Joan proved him right. Her courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the mastery of its stoic discipline wrapped in a teenager's resolve. What most trial transcripts omit is the psychological warfare Joan endured long before the pyre. For months, her captors deprived her of sleep, bombarded her with theological traps, and even staged a fake execution to break her spirit. Through it all, she responded with a clarity that would have made Epictetus proud. "You say you are my judge. Take care what you do, for in truth I am sent by God." This wasn't delusion, it was the ultimate application of Stoic principle, anchoring herself to a purpose so unshakable that no threat could sway her. Marcus Aurelius had advised, dig within. Within is the wellspring of good. It will always bubble up if you keep digging. And Joan's trial became a living testament to that truth. While her judges sought to convict her body, she liberated her mind, turning the courtroom into a stage for unconquerable will. Now consider your own trials, not of life and death perhaps, but of stress and uncertainty. The job interview where your voice shakes, the difficult conversation you've been avoiding, the dream that seems too audacious to pursue. Joan's example asks us a radical question. What if our deepest fears aren't obstacles but invitations? Seneca observed, sometimes even to live is an act of courage, and that courage thrives when we stop asking, what if I fail? And start asking, what if I'm ready? Here's the twist most historians miss. Joan's flame wasn't extinguished at the stake, it was multiplied. Her judges sought to silence her, but her composure in those final hours became a beacon far brighter than any fire. Like a Stoic sage, she demonstrated that true power lies not in controlling circumstances, but in refusing to let circumstances control you. When the first flames burned her feet, witnesses reported she didn't scream. She called out for a cross, then repeated the name Jesus until her voice failed. Even in agony, she chose focus over frenzy, purpose over panic. So tonight, as you lie awake with your own looming battles, hear Joan's challenge, not "Are you afraid?" but "What will you do with your fear?" The Stoics never promised an easy path, only that walking it with dignity makes all the difference. Your Rowan marketplace might be a boardroom, a hospital bed, or a lonely kitchen table. But the principle remains, fire tests everything it touches. The question is whether you'll emerge as ash or as iron. Dust choked the air as 30,000 Persian soldiers waited beyond the Granicus River, their spear tips glinting in the afternoon sun. Alexander the Great, just 22 years old, studied the scene without blinking. His generals urged caution. The river's current was treacherous, the enemy's position fortified. But Alexander saw something they didn't. Fear wasn't in the water, it was in the hesitation. With a glance at his troops, he spurred his horse forward, shouting words that could have come straight from Epictetus's lectures. There is no preparation for the unprepared. The moment his stallion hit the river, history tilted. What most historians miss about Alexander's brilliance wasn't his tactics, it was his training. Long before battle, he'd conditioned his mind like a Stoic athlete. Epictetus, who taught Stoicism to Roman soldiers, would have recognized the regimen. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Alexander didn't wait for war to practice courage, he cultivated it daily. While others slept, he trained barefoot in snow to harden his resolve. When offered a warm cloak during a winter campaign, he threw it aside, declaring, "What use is a king who cannot endure what his men endure?" This wasn't theatrics, it was Stoic ascesis, the discipline of voluntary discomfort to master involuntary crises. Now consider your own battles, that presentation looming next week, the fitness goal you keep postponing, the difficult conversation you're avoiding. How are you preparing? Not when the pressure's on, but now, in the quiet moments. Epictetus hammered this point. You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to your level of preparation. Alexander's victory at Granicus wasn't luck. It was the culmination of years treating every ordinary day as training for extraordinary challenges. Here's the twist most overlook. Stoic preparation isn't about rigidity. When Alexander's spear snapped mid-charge, he didn't freeze. He adapted instantly, grabbing a weapon from a fallen comrade. Like a Stoic sage, he'd rehearsed not just plans but flexibility. Marcus Aurelius would later write, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That river wasn't an obstacle. It was part of Alexander's strategy, shocking the Persians who never expected an attack at dusk. So tonight, as you set your alarm or draft your to-do list, ask yourself, what's my version of the Granicus? Not the big moment itself, but the small, daily crossings that prepare you for it. The cold shower that teaches discomfort is temporary. The withheld angry email that trains emotional discipline. Alexander's empire spanned continents, but his greatest conquest was always self-mastery, proving that the fiercest battles aren't fought with swords, but in the mind's quiet corners long before the first arrow flies. Vienna's concert halls buzzed with gossip about the eccentric composer. By 1818, Ludwig van Beethoven could barely hear the piano he played, his once keen ears now registering only muffled vibrations. Yet in that silence, he composed his Ninth Symphony, a masterpiece that would redefine Western music. The artist must forge his own courage. He scrawled in his diary words that Marcus Aurelius might have penned. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Beethoven's deafness wasn't a barrier, it became his instrument, forcing him to hear music not with his ears but with his soul. What most biographers overlook is the meticulous discipline behind his genius. As his hearing faded, Beethoven developed brutal routines to compensate, biting a wooden stick against the piano to feel vibrations, composing at dawn when his mind was sharpest. This wasn't just adaptation, it was Stoic amor fati, loving one's fate, however cruel. Where others saw disability, he found opportunity. "I will seize fate by the throat," he wrote to a friend. "It shall not bend me completely." That defiance mirrored Epictetus' teaching. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Now consider your own creative struggles. The blank page that mocks you, the skill gap that frustrates you, the criticism that stings, these aren't roadblocks. They're your tuning forks. Beethoven's notebooks reveal something startling. His most revolutionary compositions emerged after his deafness was total. Like Seneca turning exile into literary gold, he transformed limitation into liberation. Imagine if he'd waited for perfect conditions to create. History would have lost the ode to joy. Here's the radical truth Beethoven proved. Creativity thrives under constraint. His late works abandoned classical conventions precisely because he couldn't hear tradition's expectations. Marcus Aurelius anticipated this. The blazing fire makes flames and brightness out of everything thrown into it. When your own obstacles feel insurmountable, ask Beethoven's question, what can this destroy that's worth keeping? The answer might surprise you. So tonight, as you face your version of silent keys, the unfinished project, the rejected draft, the skill you've yet to master, remember, Beethoven didn't compose despite his deafness. He composed because of it. Your obstacles aren't stopping you from creating. They're shaping what only you can create. Press the stick between your teeth. Feel the vibration and write your Ninth Symphony. The ink was barely dry on the Treaty of Paris when whispers began swirling through European courts. How had Benjamin Franklin, a 79-year-old printer with no formal diplomatic training, outmaneuvered the world's most seasoned negotiators? The answer lay not in cunning, but in composure. As France's foreign minister later confessed, he disarmed resistance by yielding to it, a masterclass in Stoic pragmatism. While other envoys pounded tables with demands, Franklin sat quietly, his bifocals catching the candlelight as he let silence do the bargaining. Seneca's words might as well have been his mantra: reason overcomes all things. It must therefore be courted above all things. Franklin's genius was recognizing that diplomacy, like Stoicism, isn't about suppressing emotion, it's about channeling it strategically. When British delegates tried to provoke him by mocking American rebels, he responded not with outrage but with a bemused smile and a question. "Gentlemen, shall we negotiate the past or the future?" This was Epictetus in action. If someone speaks unjustly of you, do not be angry, but answer with kindness. By refusing to take the bait, Franklin turned their hostility into his advantage, exposing their pettiness without uttering a single insult. His famed "Join or Die" cartoon wasn't just propaganda. It was visual stoicism, appealing to reason through stark imagery rather than emotional pleas. Now imagine applying this to your daily conflicts, that heated family debate about politics, the tense salary negotiation with your boss, even the argument with your partner about household chores. What if you approached them like Franklin approached Versailles? Not by avoiding disagreement, but by weaponizing calm. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury," and Franklin lived this. When British spies intercepted his letters, he didn't rage. He began writing fake correspondence full of misleading details, letting his adversaries' own paranoia undermine them. The lesson here isn't about manipulation. It's about the Stoic art of tactical patience. Franklin spent years cultivating relationships with French intellectuals before ever asking for military aid, understanding what Seneca meant when he said, "Time heals what reason cannot." His famous air of studied indifference, wearing a simple fur cap to court while others donned powdered wigs, wasn't accidental. It signaled that unlike desperate petitioners, he could walk away. And in negotiation, as in philosophy, leverage belongs to those who appear least needy. So next time tensions rise, channel Franklin's bifocal perspective. One lens fixed on the immediate issue, the other focused on the long game. Ask yourself not, "How can I win this argument?" but "What would reason do?" Because history's most transformative agreements weren't forged in the heat of passion, but in the quiet crucible of self-possession, where the real treaty signed is always the one you make with your own impulses first. The auditorium fell silent as Steve Jobs took the stage in 1997, 12 years after being ousted from the company he founded. The black turtleneck and jeans had replaced the power suits of his exile years, but something deeper had changed too, his perspective. "I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple," he admitted to the crowd. In that moment, Jobs embodied Epictetus' timeless lesson. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. His wilderness years founding NeXT, buying Pixar, studying calligraphy hadn't been a detour. They'd been Stoic training, forging the vision that would resurrect Apple from near bankruptcy to the most valuable company on Earth. What most keynote speeches don't reveal is the daily discipline behind Jobs' reinvention. During his exile, he adopted a habit Marcus Aurelius would have praised: morning mirror exercises. Not affirmations, but brutal self-assessment. If today were the last day of my life, he'd ask his reflection, would I want to do what I'm about to do? When the answer was no too often, he pivoted, cutting products, abandoning strategies, even overhauling his leadership style. This wasn't caprice, it was the Stoic art of metanoia, the deliberate transformation of mind. Where others saw failure in his firing, Jobs saw liberation, freedom from Apple's corporate bureaucracy to rediscover why he innovated in the first place. Now consider your own crossroads, the job change you resisted, the relationship you clung to past its expiration date, the dream you shelved because it seemed impractical. Jobs' exile teaches a counterintuitive truth. Sometimes being stripped of everything familiar isn't the end of your story. It's the only way the next chapter can begin. Epictetus, born a slave, understood this better than anyone. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. For Jobs, that meant returning to Apple not as the brash visionary of 1985, but as a leader who'd learned to balance passion with patience. The products that defined his second act, the iMac, iPod, iPhone, all bore the marks of his Stoic refinement. Simplicity where others complicated, silence where others added noise. When he unveiled the first iPhone in 2007, the revolutionary feature wasn't the touchscreen, it was the absence of buttons. Jobs had turned limitation into philosophy, proving Seneca's claim. Constraints become advantages when viewed with the right mindset. So here's your challenge as the screen fades. What's your next season? Not the plan you're clinging to, but the reinvention waiting on the other side of surrender. Because resilience isn't about bouncing back, it's about bouncing forward, armed with lessons only loss can teach. The world doesn't need another Steve Jobs. But it might just need someone who, like him, discovers that the best way to predict the future is to create it, one stubborn, adaptable step at a time. The glow from radium salts cast an eerie blue light across Marie Curie's makeshift lab, a converted shed with a leaky roof and no ventilation. While male colleagues dismissed her work as unseemly for a woman, she spent 4 backbreaking years processing tons of pitchblende ore, boiling it down in giant cauldrons to isolate a fraction of a gram of radium. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, frostbite stiffened her fingers, yet when asked why she endured such conditions, her answer echoed Marcus Aurelius. Life is neither good or evil, but only a place for good and evil. We must make it good. For Curie, the pursuit of knowledge wasn't just a career, it was a moral act, a stoic commitment to purpose over comfort. Prejudice followed her like radiation. The French Academy of Sciences rejected her membership application because she was a woman. Nobel Committee members initially omitted her name from the Physics Prize nomination, crediting only her husband Pierre. Even after becoming the first woman to win a Nobel, newspapers focused more on her frail appearance than her discoveries. What kept her steady through the slights? The same discipline that guided Seneca. A wise man is content with his lot, whatever it may be, without wishing for what he has not. Curie didn't waste energy resenting ignorance, she let her work speak for itself. When critics claimed women couldn't handle science, she quietly became the first person ever to win Nobels in 2 different fields. Here's what most biographies overlook: Curie's resilience wasn't innate. It was cultivated through daily rituals that would have impressed Epictetus. She kept a ledger logging every failure, analyzing missteps with clinical detachment. During World War I, she transformed her knowledge of radiation into mobile X-ray units for battlefield hospitals, driving the trucks herself to the front lines. While others saw only risk in radioactivity, she saw potential, a mindset mirroring the Stoic practice of turning obstacles upside down. Even her eventual death from aplastic anemia, caused by prolonged radiation exposure, became proof of her unwavering commitment. In science, we must be interested in things, not in persons. Now consider your own ambitions, the dream that seems unrealistic, the goal that makes others raise eyebrows. How do you respond when the world says you can't? Curie's example offers a blueprint. Focus not on the noise of doubters, but on the quiet work that outlasts them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." Be one. Curie lived the corollary. Waste no time proving women could be scientists. Just be one, with such excellence that prejudice collapses under the weight of achievement. So tonight, as you face your own version of that drafty shed, the underpaid job, the lack of recognition, the voice whispering quit, ask yourself Curie's question: is this work worth suffering for? Not all hardship is noble, but purpose transforms endurance into legacy. The radium that eventually killed her also healed millions through cancer treatments. Such is the paradox of Stoic perseverance. What seems like sacrifice today may illuminate the world tomorrow. Carry your ore, tend your fires, let them call you reckless. History remembers those who burn brightest in the dark. Florence's gates slammed shut behind Dante Alighieri in 1302, the decree of banishment burning in his hands like the hellfire he would later describe. Stripped of his citizenship, his property confiscated, and sentenced to be burned alive if he ever returned, the poet faced a choice familiar to Stoics: collapse under injustice or transform exile into ink. What emerged from those wandering years wasn't just the Divine Comedy. It was a masterclass in turning isolation into immortality. Seneca's advice to Lucilius could have been written for Dante. All your sorrows have been wasted on you if you have not learned how to be wretched. The brilliance of Dante's Exile lies in what he refused to do as much as what he accomplished. While lesser men might have spent their days plotting revenge or begging for pardon, he channeled every slight, every heartache, every mile of his wanderings into his epic poem. His guide through the inferno wasn't just Virgil, it was Stoic amor fati, the love of fate, when he wrote of Paolo and Francesca whirling eternally in hell's storm, or Count Ugolino gnawing his betrayer's skull in the ice. He wasn't merely describing punishment. He was practicing what Marcus Aurelius preached: the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. By immortalizing his enemies in verse, he didn't curse them, he outgrew them. Notice how Dante structured his days in exile, not as a victim counting losses, but as a scholar measuring progress, rising before dawn to study philosophy, bartering his knowledge of rhetoric for shelter, scribbling verses on scraps of parchment. This was Seneca's ideal of otium leisure time weaponized for purpose. No man was ever wise by chance, the Stoic had warned. Dante proved it, turning 20 years of homelessness into the scaffolding of Western literature. Even his famous inscription above Hell's Gate, "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here," carries a Stoic double meaning, not despair but liberation from false comforts. Now consider your own modern exiles, the layoff that left you untethered, the breakup that emptied your days, even the solitude of a commute or a night shift. Dante's Exile whispers a challenge. What masterpiece could this emptiness hold? Not as escapism, but as Epictetus' art of acquiescence, accepting circumstances while bending them toward meaning. When the poet described climbing Mount Purgatory, each terrace purging a different sin, he might as well have been mapping his own psychological ascent from bitterness to transcendence. The final irony: Florence spent centuries begging for Dante's bones, while his true remains, his words, had already conquered Europe. Like a Stoic sage, he discovered exile's secret. Geography doesn't confine greatness, only resentment can. So tonight, as you stare at your own closed gates, literal or metaphorical, ask Dante's question: will I let this banishment break me, or become the fire that forges my comedy? Because the deepest hell isn't suffering, it's wasting suffering's lessons. The telegram arrived on Valentine's Day, 1884. Theodore Roosevelt, just 25 years old, raced home through the icy streets of New York to find his mother dead from typhoid fever, and his young wife Alice, who'd given birth 2 days earlier, succumbing to kidney failure in the same house. "The light has gone out of my life," he scrawled in his diary that night, blacking out the page with furious ink. What happened next would define not just a presidency, but Stoic resilience in the face of unbearable grief. Roosevelt didn't collapse or disappear. He went west, to the Badlands of Dakota Territory, where he channeled his anguish into the raw labor of cattle ranching, sunrise to sunset, until his body ached too much to feel his heart break. Black care rarely sits behind a rider whose pace is fast enough. He later wrote, echoing Epictetus' brutal truth, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters." Most biographies focus on Roosevelt's political triumphs after this loss, but the deeper lesson lies in his preparation for suffering. Long before tragedy struck, he'd immersed himself in Stoic philosophy, copying Marcus Aurelius' meditations into his personal journals. When death came, he didn't have to invent strength. He fell back on years of mental conditioning. Like a boxer training for a championship fight, Roosevelt had sparred with grief in his mind long before it landed its real blows. This wasn't avoidance, it was what Epictetus called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. By imagining worst-case scenarios beforehand, Roosevelt ensured that when they arrived, they found him ready. Now consider modern parenting. We bubble wrap our children from every scrape and disappointment, terrified to let them experience loss. But Roosevelt's father, the man who shaped his Stoic core, did the opposite. When young T.D. suffered crippling asthma attacks, his father didn't coddle him. He built a gymnasium in their home and ordered, "You must make your body." The lesson, protection doesn't prevent pain, preparation does. Centuries earlier, Seneca had written to a grieving mother, "What help is it to weep? Train instead to prevent weeping." Roosevelt's childhood asthma, his mother's death, his wife's passing each became a barbell for his emotional muscles, forging the resilience that would later sustain a nation through crisis. Here's what most miss about Roosevelt's grief. He didn't move on, he transformed it. The man who charged up San Juan Hill was the same man who once wrote, "Only those are fit to live who do not fear to die." His legendary conservation efforts saving America's wilderness sprang from the realization that all life is fleeting. Even his famous mantra, "Speak softly and carry a big stick," was pure Stoic pragmatism, action tempered by restraint, force guided by reason. So tonight, as you tuck your children into bed or stare at an old photo of someone you've lost, ask Roosevelt's question, "What is this pain preparing me to do?" Not how can I escape it, but how can I let it forge something stronger? Grief, like a Dakota blizzard, shapes landscapes, but only if we dare to ride into it. Your Badlands are waiting. Will you let them break you or build you? The gloves hit the ring with a thud in 1971. Muhammad Ali's hands wrapped not in tape this time, but in legal documents. Stripped of his boxing license for refusing the Vietnam draft, banned from the sport in his prime, the man who once floated like a butterfly now sat in courtrooms fighting for his principles. 3.5 years later, when the Supreme Court finally cleared his name, critics whispered he was finished, too old, too slow. But Ali stepped back into the ring with a focus that would have made Marcus Aurelius nod in approval. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. What followed wasn't just a comeback, it was Stoicism in motion, a masterclass in turning exile into excellence. Ali's secret weapon wasn't his jab, it was his journal. During his forced hiatus, while other athletes might have succumbed to bitterness, he filled notebooks with strategies, poetry, and philosophical reflections. Like a Stoic sage, he treated his ban not as a punishment but as preparation. The fight is won or lost far away from witnesses, he'd say long before the bright lights and roaring crowds. Epictetus, the former slave turned philosopher, couldn't have put it better. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Ali's legendary rope-a-dope tactic against George Foreman in the rumble in the jungle wasn't just physical endurance, it was psychological warfare. Leaning against the ropes, absorbing brutal punches, he whispered to Foreman mid-blow, "Is that all you got?" The crowd saw a boxer. The Stoics would have recognized a master of apatheia, not apathy. but the discipline of channeling pain into purpose. Now consider your own training not for the ring, but for life's relentless rounds. That project deadline looming like a heavyweight, the financial pressure squeezing like a body shot, the self-doubt that whispers you're washed up. Ollie's comeback whispers back, the real fight happens long before you step in the ring. Marcus Aurelius trained his mind at dawn with meditations. Ollie trained his with pre-dawn roadwork and mental rehearsals of every possible round. Both understood that mastery begins long before the moment of truth. It's forged in the daily grind of choosing discipline over distraction. Here's the twist most sports documentaries miss. Ollie's greatest victory wasn't reclaiming the title. It was proving that resilience isn't about avoiding knockdowns. It's about rising each time with sharper clarity. Seneca observed, "A gem cannot be polished without friction." And Ollie's exile polished him into a different kind of champion. The brash poet who once boasted, "I am the greatest," emerged from his ban with a new mantra. Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. That's Stoic evolution, turning struggle not just into strength, but into wisdom worth sharing. So tonight, as you lace up your metaphorical gloves, whether for a career shift, a personal goal, or just getting through another demanding week, ask yourself Ollie's question: what am I doing when no one's watching? Not the flashy workouts you post online, but the quiet repetitions that build real endurance, because history's most remarkable comebacks don't start in the spotlight. They begin in the shadows, where the mind learns what the body can't yet do. Your rope-a-dope moment is coming. Will you be leaning on the ropes or ready to strike? The Mississippi River was low that summer, the steamboats stranded like beached whales along the mudflats. Young Samuel Clemens, not yet Mark Twain, watched as his dreams of piloting those grand vessels evaporated with the water. Bankruptcy loomed, his brother's newspaper had failed, and frontier life offered little mercy. Yet what did he do? He picked up a pen and wrote a satirical letter to the local paper, poking fun at his own misfortunes with such sharp wit that readers begged for more. Decades later, facing financial ruin again after bad investments, Twain would joke, "I'm not afraid to die, I just don't want to be there when it happens." This wasn't escapism, it was Stoic levity in action. Seneca, who endured exile and Nero's madness, had prescribed the same medicine centuries earlier. We should take wandering outdoor walks so that the mind might be nourished and refreshed by the open air and deep breathing, and sometimes even by laughter. Twain's genius lay in recognizing that humor doesn't negate suffering, it disarms it. When his beloved daughter Susie died suddenly of meningitis at 24, he didn't suppress his grief. He channeled it into darkly comic essays, writing, "The secret source of humor is not joy but sorrow." Like a Stoic practicing premeditatio malorum, anticipating worst-case scenarios, Twain used satire to rehearse life's cruelties before they arrived. His famous quip, "The reports of my death are greatly exaggerated," originated as a telegram to anxious newspapers after a rumor spread that he died penniless. By mocking his own demise, he robbed fear of its power. Now contrast this with how we often handle setbacks today. Social media feeds brim with performative outrage or toxic positivity, leaving little room for Twain's middle path, acknowledging life's absurdity while refusing to be crushed by it. Epictetus, who laughed when his cruel master broke his leg, would have recognized Twain's method. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. When a heckler yelled, "Your novels are garbage," during a lecture, Twain didn't bristle. He leaned in and whispered, "Sir, your secret is safe with me." The crowd roared, the insult dissolved. Here's why this matters. Stoic humor isn't about jokes. It's about perspective. Twain's The Mysterious Stranger, written after his wife's death, features a devil who reveals the universe's indifference to human pain. Sounds bleak, not when delivered with Twain's trademark wink. Like Marcus Aurelius journaling that the universe is change, Twain used irony to highlight how little control we truly have, freeing himself to focus on what he could shape: his next sentence, his next breath, his next punchline. So tonight, when life hands you riverbed mud instead of riverboat glory, try Twain's remedy. Write down your worst-case scenario, then exaggerate it until it's ridiculous. Imagine explaining your struggles to a Martian, or turning your daily commute into a satirical travelogue. The goal isn't to trivialize hardship, but to shrink it down to size. As Seneca knew, laughter doesn't solve problems, it simply reminds us that we're more than the problems we solve. Twain put it better: against the assault of laughter, nothing can stand. Not even fate. The Channel Islands were bitter in winter, the winds howling across the rocky shores where Victor Hugo spent 19 years in exile. Stripped of his French citizenship, banished by Napoleon III for his political writings, the author could have crumbled into obscurity. Instead, he turned his rented house on Guernsey into a literary fortress, rising before dawn each day to write standing at a small desk overlooking the sea. The result, Les Miserables, a novel that would redefine social conscience in literature, born not in Parisian cafes, but in the crucible of forced isolation. "I am not an exile," Hugo corrected visitors, "I am a volunteer." In that declaration, he echoed Epictetus' most defiant teaching: circumstances don't make the man, they reveal him. Hugo's Exile followed a pattern the Stoics would have recognized: creative genius flourishing under constraint. With no publishers knocking at his door, no literary salons to attend, he channeled all his energy into the page. His daily ritual writing from sunrise to noon, then revising by candlelight, mirrored Marcus Aurelius' discipline of morning meditations and evening reflections. Even the novel's protagonist, Jean Valjean, embodies Stoic transformation, a prisoner who turns his suffering into moral strength. The book which the reader now holds in his hands, Hugo wrote in the preface, is the march from evil to good, from injustice to justice. Not coincidentally, it's also the arc of a soul practicing amor fati, embracing fate rather than fighting it. What most biographies overlook is Hugo's meticulous use of exile as a creative filter. On Guernsey, he banned newspapers, avoided gossip, and limited correspondence, not out of bitterness, but to protect what Seneca called the inner citadel of the mind. The sprawling novel he produced, with its digressions on Parisian sewers, convents, and battle strategies, wasn't undisciplined rambling. It was the product of a mind freed from distractions, turning every memory of France into raw material for art. Like Epictetus teaching in exile after being banished from Rome, Hugo discovered that banishment doesn't silence voices, it distills them. Now consider your own creative droughts. The project abandoned halfway, the blank page that mocks you, the dream deferred by practicalities. What if these aren't obstacles but your Guernsey? Hugo didn't wait for inspiration. He mined it from his constraints, using isolation to ask the questions that fuel great art. What does injustice feel like in the dark? How does hope sound when no one's listening? The novel's famous line, "Even the darkest night will end and the sun will rise," wasn't poetic flourish. It was Stoic realism, written by a man who'd counted every hour of his own long night. So here's the challenge hidden in Hugo's Inkwell. Next time life exiles you to a sick, a tedious job, or a lonely season, ask not "how do I escape," but "what can I build here?" The words you write in waiting rooms, the sketches you make during commutes, the ideas you nurture in obscurity, these are your Les Miserables in embryo. Because endurance isn't just surviving the storm, it's learning to hear the music in the wind and composing something beautiful enough to make others listen. The lab was dark except for the eerie blue crackle of electricity arcing between Tesla's coils. By 1895, the inventor had already given the world alternating current, yet he worked alone in a cramped New York loft, pouring his last dollars into experiments that financiers called madness. While Edison basked in the glow of his incandescent bulbs, Tesla scribbled in his notebook, "Let the future tell the truth and evaluate each one according to his work and accomplishments." In that moment, he channeled Marcus Aurelius' meditation on legacy. What we do now echoes in eternity. Tesla's genius wasn't just his grasp of electromagnetism, it was his stoic willingness to labor in obscurity, not for fame, but for the sheer possibility of progress. Most biographies focus on Tesla's rivalry with Edison, but the deeper story lies in his psychological resilience. When investors abandoned his wireless power projects, when peers mocked his visions of global communication networks, he doubled down with a discipline that would have impressed Epictetus. Rising at 3 a.m. daily, he practiced what Stoics called ascesis, voluntary hardship, surviving on bread and milk while working 18-hour stretches. His famed photographic memory wasn't just a gift, it was a tool honed through relentless mental exercises, mirroring Seneca's advice, "No man was ever wise by chance." While others chased patents, Tesla chased understanding, once spending 2 years methodically replicating Edison's failed experiments just to master every variable. Here's what history often misses. Tesla's greatest inventions emerged from his darkest years. Broke and ostracized after losing funding for Wardenclyffe Tower, he didn't despair, he pivoted. Without a lab, he designed in his mind, later claiming to test machinery mentally before building it. This wasn't delusion, it was Stoic premeditatio applied to engineering. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting." And Tesla lived this. When denied resources, he turned constraints into creative fuel, sketching turbines and oscillators on napkins in cafes that gave him free meals in exchange for dazzling patrons with his ideas. Now consider your own work, that project no one appreciates yet, the skill you're mastering without applause, the idea that feels ahead of its time. These are your Wardenclyffe Towers. Tesla's example whispers a radical question. What if obscurity isn't your enemy but your incubator? The Stoic ideal he embodied flips modern obsession with validation. True innovation thrives not in spotlight, but in shadows long enough to let roots grow deep. His alternating current system now powers civilizations, yet he died alone in a hotel room feeding pigeons. So tonight, as you labor at something only you seem to value, remember Tesla's trade-off, fleeting recognition for enduring impact. The world will catch up or it won't. What matters is what Seneca called the tranquility that comes when you stop caring what others say. Your wireless transmission might be a novel, a parenting philosophy, or a better way to organize warehouses. The point isn't whether it makes you famous. The point is whether it makes the future different, and that, as Tesla proved, is a current that never stops flowing. Palace gates stood locked, the streets of Honolulu patrolled by American Marines in 1893. Queen Liliuokalani could have ordered her royal guards to fight, to spill blood for her throne. Instead, she sat at her writing desk composing a song that would become Hawaii's anthem of resilience. "Do not stand at my grave and weep, I am not there, I do not sleep." In that moment, she embodied Seneca's definition of noble silence. He suffers no less who conceals his wounds than he who makes them known. Her choice to resist not with swords, but with dignity, would redefine what leadership looks like when power is slipping away. History remembers conquerors, but Liliuokalani proved something more radical, that sometimes the strongest action is restraint. When American businessmen overthrew her government, she didn't rally armies or incite riots. She surrendered not her principles but her crown, trusting that history would judge her oppressors. For 9 months under house arrest, she stitched quilts, wrote music, and quietly documented Hawaii's traditions, knowing cultural survival outlasts political regimes. This wasn't passivity, it was strategy distilled to its purest form. Like Marcus Aurelius writing meditations while battling Germanic tribes, she demonstrated that real authority isn't about controlling circumstances, it's about mastering your response to them. The parallels to Stoic practice run deep. Epictetus, born into slavery, taught that freedom is internal long before it's external. No man is free who is not master of himself. Liliuokalani lived this when she declined to flee into exile, instead facing her captors daily with flawless composure. Even after being forced to sign a document renouncing her throne, she added a single phrase in Hawaiian, "Ua pau ki opuni o Hawaii." The Hawaiian kingdom is finished. Not a concession, but a prophecy. Her quiet resistance turned the act of surrender into an indictment, weaponizing grace where violence would have been expected. Now consider modern leadership, the boss who shouts to assert authority, the politician trading dignity for attention. Liliuokalani's example whispers a different truth. Influence grows when you refuse to meet chaos with chaos. Seneca observed, "Speech is the mirror of the soul, a man speaks as he is." The Queen's measured words during her trial, "I would not feel the chains," carried more weight than any protest. She understood what corporate boards and social media pundits often forget. Silence amplifies substance. So here's your challenge today. When tensions flare, whether in a family argument or a high-stakes meeting, channel Liliuokalani's discipline. Pause, breathe, ask not, "How can I win this?" but "How can I rise above it?" Because leadership isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about being the calmest, the one who, like Hawaii's last queen, lets integrity echo long after power fades. The ice had swallowed their ship whole, leaving 28 men stranded on a shifting wasteland with nothing but 3 lifeboats and dwindling supplies. Yet in the heart of Antarctica's endless winter, Ernest Shackleton's crew did something extraordinary. They turned survival into an art form, not through brute strength, but through something far more powerful, the unspoken Stoic pact that no man would suffer alone. When frostbite gnawed at their fingers, they took turns warming each other's hands. When rations ran low, they pretended to enjoy hoosh stew made from melted ice and seal blubber, joking about opening a restaurant someday. This wasn't just camaraderie, it was Epictetus' philosophy in action. We must endure the winter and not abandon our post. It's not the load that breaks you, but how you carry it together. Shackleton understood what modern teams often forget. Shared hardship binds people more tightly than shared success. Every night in their makeshift ice camp, he rotated sleeping bags so no single man always got the damp spot. When morale cratered, he organized absurd competitions. Who could grow the longest beard, who could tell the worst joke. These weren't distractions, they were psychological lifelines. The Stoics called this sympatheia, the interdependence of all people. Marcus Aurelius wrote of it in his Meditations. What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee. Shackleton's men lived it, turning their frozen prison into a classroom where each lesson was simple. Your struggle is mine, now zoom into your own life. That coworker drowning in deadlines, the friend going through a divorce, the neighbor who just lost their job, how do you show up for them? Not with grand gestures, but with Shackleton's daily micro-resilience. Maybe it's taking the burnt piece of toast so someone else gets the good one, or listening without offering solutions when a venting session is needed more than advice. The Stoic ideal isn't about enduring in isolation. It's about being the person who notices when someone else's boots are leaking and offering to trade for a shift. Here's what Shackleton's crew teaches us that corporate team-building exercises can't. Trust isn't built on ropes courses. It's forged in the small, unglamorous moments where you prove you'll share the weight. When sailor Frank Wilde gave his mittens to frostbitten shipmate Thomas Ord Lees, he didn't do it for recognition. He did it because Epictetus was right. No man is free who is not master of himself, and true mastery means choosing generosity when it costs you. So tonight, as you scroll through contacts on your phone, ask Shackleton's question: who in my circle is facing their Antarctic winter? Not with dramatic rescues in mind, but with the quiet determination to be someone's dry socks or bad joke when the ice seems endless. Because the most stoic survival skill isn't stiff upper lips, it's open hands. The whip scars on Frederick Douglass's back weren't just wounds, they were a map of defiance. By 16, he'd endured beatings that would break most men. Yet he stood before abolitionist crowds in the 1840s with shoulders squared, his voice rolling like thunder. Where justice is denied, where poverty is enforced, where ignorance prevails, then neither persons nor property will be safe. This wasn't just oratory, it was Stoic conviction in action. Centuries earlier, Marcus Aurelius had written, "What isn't good for the hive isn't good for the bee." And Douglas embodied that truth, turning personal suffering into fuel for collective liberation. Douglas's resilience wasn't passive endurance, it was strategic. When his enslaver, Edward Covey, tried to crush his spirit with relentless labor and violence, Douglas didn't submit. He fought back literally in a 6-hour brawl that left Covey bloodied and terrified. "I was nothing before," Douglas later wrote, "I was a man now." This moment wasn't just physical resistance. It was the Stoic principle of prohesis, the unshakable inner will Epictetus described as the only thing truly our own. Douglas understood that before he could change laws, he had to reclaim his own mind, writing, "You have seen how a man was made a slave. You shall see how a slave was made a man." Yet here's what most history books gloss over. Douglas's greatest weapon wasn't his fists or even his words. It was his emotional discipline. Facing hostile white crowds who threw rotten eggs and shouted slurs, he remained calm, turning their rage into proof of his arguments. When allies urged him to soften his message to appease white audiences, he refused, declaring, "I would unite with anybody to do right and with nobody to do wrong." That Stoic justice distilled Seneca's insistence that a man is as miserable as he thinks he is, flipped into a rallying cry. Oppression persists only when the oppressed internalize their chains. Now bring this into your world. That co-worker who dismisses your ideas, the family member who mocks your principles, the societal injustice that feels too vast to confront. Douglas's example asks, where is your Covey farm? Not the battlefield you avoid, but the one you choose because it tests your resolve. Marcus Aurelius warned, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one, and Douglas lived this, publishing his autobiography while still legally a fugitive, risking recapture to awaken consciences. The final lesson. Endurance in advocacy isn't about endless struggle. It's about knowing which battles forge your character and which ones forge change. Douglas didn't just survive slavery, he studied it, memorizing ship routes and legal codes even as he picked tobacco, preparing for a future he couldn't yet see. That Stoic premeditatio, not fear of what might come, but readiness for whatever does. So tonight, as you scroll past another headline about injustice, ask Douglas's question, if not now, when? If not me, who, not with guilt but with clarity, because the world changes when ordinary people decide their comfort matters less than their conscience. The whip scars fade, the voice remains, and the choice is always yours, to bear witness or to speak. History remembers those who do both. The canvas was her battlefield, the brush her weapon. Frida Kahlo lay trapped in a full-body cast after a horrific tram accident at 18. Her spine shattered, her pelvis impaled by a steel handrail. Doctors said she might never walk again. So she painted not to escape her pain, but to stare it down with unflinching honesty. "I paint my own reality," she later said, a declaration Seneca would have recognized. Fire tests gold, suffering tests brave men. In that cramped Mexico City bedroom, Kahlo didn't just create art, she practiced Stoic alchemy, turning agony into masterpieces that would shake the world. Most see Kahlo's work as raw emotion spilled onto canvas, but look closer, every brushstroke was a calculated act of defiance. When confined to bed for months, she rigged an easel above her, painting self-portraits with the precision of a philosopher examining her soul. Like Marcus Aurelius journaling at night, Kahlo used her art as a mirror. "I am my own muse," she wrote. The famous broken column, depicting her spine as a shattered Greek pillar held together by metal braces, wasn't just autobiography, it was Stoic premeditatio made visible. By confronting her fractured body daily on canvas, she robbed pain of its power to shock. Epictetus had taught, "He who has why to bear can bear almost anyhow," and Kahlo's why blazed in every vivid color she mixed. Here's what museum placards rarely mention. Kahlo's greatest works emerged not despite her suffering, but through it. After multiple miscarriages, she painted Henry Ford Hospital, showing herself hemorrhaging on a blood-stained bed surrounded by floating embryos. Critics called it grotesque, Stoics would call it truth transmuted. Just as Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body." Kahlo proved that creativity thrives when channeled through life's cracks. Even her flamboyant Tehuana dresses, now celebrated as feminist icons, began as practical armor. Corsets to support her spine, long skirts to hide scarred legs. Every limitation became an aesthetic choice, every constraint a catalyst. Now bring this into your creative life. That heartbreak you hide, that chronic pain you downplay, that failure you replay in the dark. What if they're not obstacles to your art, but its very materials? Kahlo's example whispers a challenge. Don't wait for inspiration, mine it from your deepest wounds. When her husband Diego Rivera betrayed her repeatedly, she didn't suppress the anger. She painted the two Fridas, one heart torn open, the other whole. This wasn't wallowing, it was the Stoic art of objective representation, turning subjective torment into universal truth. So tonight, as you face your own private pain, whether it's physical, emotional, or the quiet ache of unrealized dreams, ask Kahlo's question, how could this be my palette? Not to glorify suffering, but to alchemize it. Grab whatever tools you have, a journal, a camera, even just your phone's voice memos, and express one raw truth you've been avoiding. Like Kahlo's unibrow that defied beauty standards, or her monkeys that symbolized both playfulness and loneliness, your flaws and frustrations contain the very shapes that will make your voice distinct. Seneca was right, no tree becomes rooted and sturdy unless many a wind assails it. Your art doesn't grow in spite of the storm, it grows because of it. Now pick up your brush, whatever form it takes, and paint your reality without apology. Blood-soaked and victorious, Emperor Ashoka stood atop Kalinga's battlefield in 261 B. C, gazing at the carnage his army had wrought. The air reeked of smoke and death, over 100,000 slain, entire cities reduced to ashes. Then something unexpected happened. The conqueror who'd built his reputation on ruthless expansion dropped to his knees weeping. This wasn't just regret, it was Stoic metanoia, the profound transformation that occurs when remorse becomes revelation. Ashoka's edicts, carved into stone pillars across India, would later confess, "The beloved of the gods was overcome with remorse for the slaughter at Kalinga." In that moment, he channeled Epictetus' most humbling lesson. No man is free who is not master of himself, and no victor is truly victorious until he conquers his own nature. What makes Ashoka's story extraordinary isn't his change of heart, it's what he did with that change. Like a Stoic philosopher king, he turned self-disgust into systemic reform. He abolished brutal policies, erected hospitals for men and animals alike, and sent envoys to spread Buddhist teachings of nonviolence, not as propaganda but as public atonement. His famous lion-topped pillars weren't symbols of power, they were admissions of fallibility, engraved with confessions like, "The beloved of the gods considers victory by righteousness the only true victory." Marcus Aurelius would have recognized this as apatheia in its purest form, not the absence of emotion, but the channeling of emotion into ethical action. Now contrast this with modern leadership. How often do we see politicians double down on mistakes rather than evolve? Ashoka's radical honesty offers an alternative. He didn't just privately regret Kalinga, he immortalized that regret in stone, forcing future generations to confront the cost of unchecked ambition. This mirrors Seneca's advice to Lucilius: "Confession of errors is like a broom sweeping away the dirt of the soul." But here's the crucial difference between empty guilt and stoic remorse. Ashoka didn't wallow. He transformed his shame into infrastructure, his horror into humanitarianism. Your turn, that harsh word you can't take back, the opportunity you squandered, the betrayal you rationalized, these are your Kalingas. Epictetus posed the question Ashoka answered. What use is philosophy if it doesn't heal wounds? The emperor's journey from warmonger to peacemaker proves that even the bloodiest hands can become instruments of healing if their owner dares to look at them without flinching. So tonight, as you lie awake replaying your regrets, ask Ashoka's question: what will this pain build? Not how can I forget it, but how can I forge it into something that serves others? Because Stoic detachment isn't about erasing the past, it's about letting it sculpt a better future. The battlefield is quiet now, the real work begins. The Hanoi Hilton was no hotel, its walls dripped with blood and despair. In 1965, Navy pilot James Stockdale ejected over Vietnam, breaking his back upon impact. When Vietnamese soldiers dragged him to the infamous prison camp, they made one thing clear: his suffering had just begun. 7.5 years of torture followed: beatings, rope bindings that dislocated his shoulders, solitary confinement in pitch-black cells. Yet when Stockdale emerged in 1973, he credited not survival tactics but philosophy. "I owe my life to Epictetus," he'd say, clutching his dog-eared copy of the Stoics' teachings. This wasn't academic admiration, it was battlefield proof that Stoicism works when the stakes are life and death. Stockdale's endurance followed a brutal Stoic algorithm. Each morning, he'd ask himself Epictetus' foundational question: what's within my control today? Not his captor's cruelty, not the length of his confinement, only his responses. When guards demanded military secrets, he bit through his tongue rather than betray fellow prisoners. When they starved him, he recited Marcus Aurelius: "The obstacle is the way." Most remarkably, he organized a tap code communication system between cells, turning torture sessions into opportunities to pass coded messages with grunts of pain. This was Stoic premeditatio in its purest form, anticipating the worst to render it powerless. "They can break my bones," Stockdale told new arrivals, "but they can't own my mind unless I let them." Here's what most leadership books gloss over. Stockdale didn't just endure, he weaponized suffering. He created a hierarchy of pain, ranking tortures from annoying to unbearable. then trained his mind to withstand each level. Like a Stoic scientist, he logged which psychological tactics broke prisoners fastest, isolation worked better than beatings, and developed countermeasures. When guards threatened to execute him unless he confessed to war crimes, he slit his scalp with a razor and beat his face bloody, making himself useless for propaganda. The message, "My body is yours, my conscience is mine," Marcus Aurelius had written, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," but Stockdale proved it under electrodes and bamboo spikes. Now bring this into your modern life. That job draining your spirit, the medical diagnosis freezing your blood, the relationship teetering on collapse, these are your Hanoi Hilton. Not because they compare in cruelty, but because they test the same muscle, your ability to separate what happens to you from what happens within you. Stockdale's secret wasn't toughness, it was discernment. He knew when to resist, organizing prisoner resistance, and when to surrender, accepting permanent leg damage from neglect. This mirrors Seneca's paradox. Sometimes even to live is an act of courage. The Stockdale paradox, named for his strategy, holds two truths. You must confront reality's brutality, yet never lose faith that you'll prevail. When psychologists later asked how the optimists fared in camp, Stockdale shocked them. They died first. They kept thinking we'd be out by Christmas. Then Easter, then Thanksgiving. The survivors, realists who stared into the abyss without blinking. This is Stoicism stripped to its bones, not wishful thinking, but willful preparation. So tonight, as you face your own private battles, ask Stockdale's question. What's my version of the tap code? Not how do I escape this pain, but how do I use it to send signals of resilience to my future self? Maybe it's journaling one lesson from each setback, or whispering Marcus Aurelius' reminder, the mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting, before a difficult conversation. Stockdale's legacy isn't about surviving hell. It's about emerging with your humanity intact, your purpose clarified, and your capacity for joy against all odds still beating. The torturers are gone, the philosophy remains, and the choice, as always, is yours. Will this break you, or will this build you? The Stoics whisper the answer lies not in your circumstances, but in what you do with them. From burning cities to frozen battlefields, from prison cells to laboratory benches, these 30 stories reveal a truth as unshakable as the Stoics who lived it. Emotional endurance isn't just survival, it's the hidden force that bends history. George Washington's icy resolve at the Delaware, Marie Curie's relentless pursuit in a leaking shed, Shackleton's laughter in the Antarctic darkness. Each faced moments where panic would have been justified, where surrender would have been understandable, yet they chose something radical, to meet chaos not with crumbling but with clarity. And here's the secret they all shared: this wasn't innate genius or superhuman strength. It was trained resilience, built on Stoic principles anyone can practice. Marcus Aurelius showed us that power lies not in controlling events, but in mastering our judgments about them. Seneca proved that adversity isn't an obstacle to the good life, it's the raw material for building it. Epictetus, born a slave, taught that freedom is an inside job long before circumstances cooperate. These aren't ancient theories, they're battle-tested blueprints, proven across centuries by emperors and artists, scientists and soldiers. When Joan of Arc smiled at her executioners, when Lincoln channeled his depression into empathy, when Stockdale turned torture into a laboratory of the mind, they weren't just enduring. They were rewriting what's possible. Now it's your turn. The same principles that guided Mandela through 27 years of imprisonment or Tesla through decades of ridicule are available to you today. Start small. When frustration flares, pause and ask, what part of this can I control? When fear whispers, I can't handle this, remember Churchill's black dog or Frida Kahlo's broken spine not as comparisons, but as proof that human resilience is vast and trainable. Keep a journal like Marcus Aurelius, turn setbacks into data like Edison, find humor in the absurd like Twain. This isn't about becoming unfeeling, it's about becoming unshakable, so your emotions inform you without controlling you. Epictetus put it best, no man is free who is not master of himself. That's the ultimate takeaway from these 30 lives. Freedom isn't the absence of storms, but the ability to navigate them with steady hands. So as you close this video, don't just admire these stories, step into them. Share in the comments which historical example resonated most. Where will you practice Stoic resilience this week? Because history isn't just something we study, it's something we shape, one disciplined response at a time. The next chapter isn't written yet. What will yours